At around 8:38 p.m. on a cold January 23rd evening in 1974, the quiet town of Llandrillo and surrounding areas in Wales would experience something unusual. Hugh Lloyd, 14 years old at the time and the son of a farmer, was watching TV with his two sisters and a neighbour that was looking after him. His parents were out that night, and all of a sudden there was a very loud thud, an impact that shook the entire house. He left the house to check on the cattle, and then he noticed something higher on the mountain. According to Hugh and others, there were white lights zipping about near the summit. Around the time of this incident, there were others who lived near the bottom of the mountain who had reported seeing something fairly large above it. One local had said that he saw something large, about the size of a bus, hovering near the mountain. He said that he didn't know what it was. When asked if it was a plane, he said that he'd never seen anything like it before. He described it as being circular and being completely white towards the centre. A fair number of residents, whether they had personally seen anything or not, also reported hearing a kind of slushing sound emanating from the mountains. Shortly after these sounds, the town was engulfed by tremors. These tremors registered on the Richter scale at 3.5 and was felt for 60 miles surrounding the mountain. Shortly after this quake, locals described hearing this loud bang. Many who hadn't seen anything thought that they were experiencing an earthquake which had caused something to explode. But to those that had briefly seen or heard this thing were questioning as to whether this might have been a pilot that was in trouble up on the mountain. This was also the opinion of the district nurse, Pat Evans. Pat thought that someone was in desperate need of medical attention there and then. From her window, she could see the mountains, and to her it looked like something had impacted it. She called out to her daughters, and together they got in her car and they drove to the base of the mountain, ready to respond alongside whatever rescue effort would be put together. However, as they were getting closer to the mountain, all present in the car had the same thing to say. She immediately drove us as close to the site as possible, believing that her help would be needed. What she saw there continues to confound people today, claiming to have seen a huge ball glowing and pulsating on the mountain. The nurse also stated that she saw scattered lights around it, which she believed at the time to be rescue workers approaching the site, even though she could not explain how they arrived so soon. Pat and her daughters described that whatever this ball of light was, it was large and glowing a reddish orange. There were no flames present, and its spherical shape led her to believe that she was not looking at a plane. She described the lights surrounding it almost like little fairy lights, and they were zigzagging about this thing. While panicked, still thinking that someone needed help, she started to analyse and really take in what she was seeing. She said that both she and her daughters realised that nobody could have gotten up there so quickly to help, since you'd quite literally need to ascend the mountain to get to it, and she had watched in real time as this happened. Upon this realisation, she explained that her panicked state turned more into confusion. Pat managed to find a phone booth, and from it she called the police at the Colwyn Bay headquarters, only to learn that she wasn't the only one doing so. At this late hour in this peaceful place, the local authorities would usually be quiet, with practically no calls being made. And this was the case just minutes beforehand, but now the control room supervisor was being flooded with phone calls by concerned residents. These calls, which we only know about today as a result of Freedom of Information Act requests, varied. Many were concerned and wanted to know if they were in danger or not because of the loud bang that took place. It seems to me that there was confusion surrounding whether or not this earthquake had damaged infrastructure that caused the bang, or whether the bang had caused the tremors. Some were informing the authorities that they thought that a pilot needed rescue atop the mountain. Others were more strange. Documents acquired by the Daily Post in 2008 showed many reports were coming into Gwynedd Police that night and something out of the ordinary was occurring. A witness who saw an object on the hillside said in a statement to police, "Saw bright red light like coal fire red, large perfect circle like a big bonfire. Could see lights above and to the right and white lights moving to the bottom. Light changed colour to yellowish white and back again." A message in a police log said, "There's been a large explosion in the area and there is a large fire in the mountainside. I can see the fire where I am." Telex message to Chief Constable, "Saw bright green lights, object with tail travelling west." There are more and they go on and on. Pat echoed these sentiments to the police. She told them about the perfectly circular reddish glow, which I suppose was felt must have been a fire, and she told them about the dancing lights above it. After this call was put in, Pat's daughters felt uneasy and a bit freaked out about what they were seeing, and they requested to their mother that they should go home. Pat agreed, and so off they went. The authorities, on the other hand, took control and contacted the Royal Air Force alongside air traffic controllers, and wanted to know whether a military or civilian aircraft had been around the Llandrillo area and the mountains. This is important to note because firstly, the local police themselves had experienced the tremors and could see the supposed fires on the mountain. In fact, from this distance, the tremors were still so powerful that inside one nearby establishment, the locals who were out drinking said that it caused glasses and bottles to fall from the counters and tables. One truck driver who was far away enough not to have seen what happened said that he experienced the vibrations from the impact, and his first thought was that a lorry had come off the motorway and crashed into a house, causing some kind of massive gas-related accident. The initial police response seemed to indicate that they themselves believed that somebody may have hit the mountain. During the phone calls made to them, certain things came to light. Many people reported the bright lights in the sky hovering around the site. This is interesting because these lights were seen after the tremors and supposed crash, not before. As if they themselves, whatever they were, had responded to the incident, which seemed to be the opinion of some of the onlookers that were close enough to the mountain. There was never a great explanation given for these lights. The local authorities said that it was probably people going lamping and hunting for foxes and rabbits essentially. This was not widely accepted by the people in the area though, as many of them were claiming that these lights were not literally on the mountain itself but seemed to be above it. In any case, during the time of the bang and after the tremors had faded, Hugh's landline would not stop ringing from concerned neighbours who were all trying to contact one another. Locals then left their homes to go outside and they were discussing what had just happened. Most on the ground did not believe that it was simply an earthquake, which is what the official explanation would later suggest. But instead, they all agreed that this bang came from the direction of the mountain that towered above them. In response, we know that the local authorities put together a 4-man team consisting of officers who also had mountain rescue experience, and they conducted a search for this suspected aircraft and pilot. Of course, they did not believe that the pilot would be found in any good condition. At 9 PM, after the flurry of calls that they'd had, the police opened a major incident log, and within 1 hour of the impact, the 4 officers were ascending the mountain. There, they all witnessed a bright white light near the top that was fading in its intensity until it stopped. Hugh and others had also seen this from the ground. The officers believed that they were going to stumble across a wreckage. However, after reaching the top and conducting their foot search, they didn't find anything. It was said that they didn't have a coherent understanding of what had just happened. On the way back down the mountain, they came across a police van with more members than the initial force set out with. I'd imagine that because it was late, the authorities didn't have immediate access to people and had to call them into the station from other jurisdictions. Because this was a rural, peaceful area, I'd imagine that they probably didn't need too many officers at any given time, usually. In any case, the 4 officers had met with the others who were on their way to meet them. Among this larger contingent of policemen, there was a senior officer among them. The four told them that they had driven around and conducted a foot search, but there did not appear to be anything up there. After another brief search involving all of them, around 14 I believe, they all came back down the mountain at 11:30 PM. Interestingly, the senior official was the then Police Assistant Chief Constable Elford Roberts, who said this about his approach to the mountain before meeting the four officers that were on their way back down. As we were driving, all of a sudden we saw this green light in the sky ahead of us, and it seemed to be an arcing light, but it was very sudden, totally unexpected. Different to anything I've ever seen before. Back at the station, following further discussion by all of the officers who'd gone up and searched, they requested that the RAF conducted a flyover in the morning to see if there was a wreckage that they had just missed somehow. What's interesting about this though, is that you'd have to imagine if there was a plane in the area that night, the RAF, if it was theirs, would know about it. And similarly, if it was civilian, then air traffic control would know about it. That seems to completely rule out the idea of a civilian aircraft. And the RAF had obviously said that it wasn't them. Though if this was an experimental aircraft or something similar that had malfunctioned, I'd imagine their response would be the same. I couldn't find whether or not the RAF did the requested flyover, though I'd imagine it happened. But I do know that the following day, they sent 3 of their personnel to meet the police force, and they went back up the mountain together on foot. They were up there fairly early in the morning, and they searched until around 2 PM, but apparently they also didn't find anything. Interestingly enough, there is no official record of this second search, but enough people who were outside watching the commotion saw the police on the night that it all happened, and then the following morning saw the RAF going up with the police officers. The following day, some locals in the area complained that access to the roads near the mountain and the mountain itself was sealed off, and they were not allowed to use their usual public walking paths or the roads. Apparently, this was to the great dismay of local shepherds, who didn't understand what was happening or why this was necessary and were annoyed about it as their routes had now just been disrupted. Pat Evans stated that she never experienced any road closures in the area, so it's not clear if that was just a stone-cold lie, a rumour, or if the road closure was very brief and happened to affect one or more shepherds who complained about it. Pat's rather detailed account was not the only one of its kind. Mike Seville lived in fairly close proximity to the mountain too, and his home was situated at a much higher elevation than where Pat and her daughters had been stood. Mike was around 3 miles away from Pat's location. At the time, he said that he was sitting with his wife and they were just reading and relaxing while their young son was in bed asleep. They saw an intense light coming from the mountaintop, followed by a tremor. He said that it shook the house quite violently, frightening the life out of he and his wife. His wife stayed inside the house at the window while Mike got some thicker clothes together and went outside. He said that he went over to the barn steps and both of them from their respective positions could see what they described as a half-sun shape going down atop the mountain. They said it was bright orange, and like Pat, at first they thought it might have been a plane. However, he then said that there were no flames, it was just a very defined circular shape, which was similar to descriptions given by other callers to the police that night. Mike had absolutely no idea what was happening, or if his family was in danger. So they awoke their son, got dressed properly, and they all left the house and travelled to their neighbour's home who also had a farm plot. Their neighbours were Arthur and Dillis. They did try to ring Arthur first before heading there, but the phone line was busy as Dillis was constantly trying to call the police until eventually she got through to them. When questioned about that night, Mike was asked if he'd heard an explosion. Mike said, "I didn't hear it. We didn't know what was going on. The object was very static. The 4 of us were stood watching it. I'm not sure about the timescale, but in front of our eyes it went down and disappeared." When asked about that statement, he said specifically, "I think it probably went down onto a lower ridge behind the mountain. The object sank behind the Kefenkoch Ridge, and it just gave the impression that it disappeared. In the darkness of night, you couldn't see the ridge in front of the blackness of the mountains." To be clear, what he was saying that It was only half sun-shaped from his perspective because whatever it was behind part of the mountain and was getting lower and lower. It's interesting that from Mike's position he didn't hear the bang, although his family was situated around 3 miles or so from Pat's location at the mountain. You'd still think that he might have heard something though, since the tremors were very strong at his position. I suppose also, if something really was up there that night, that could have been why the officers that went to the summit didn't find anything, since, if correct, it may have dropped down to a lower ridge on the other side. The police had Pat draw a sketch for them of what she'd seen, though I couldn't locate a copy of the drawing on the internet. But through this, they were actually able to get an estimate of how big this circular shape was. Pat had said that the glowing circle was just a little bit smaller than the moon. Using some fancy mathematics and triangulating its position in relation to both Pat and Mike, and using their distances apart, it was estimated that this thing was about 15 to 22 meters in diameter, or somewhere around the size of a basketball court, is the conclusion that they came to. It wasn't just the lights on the mountain though. In fact, things get a little weirder. From Pat's location, the next village along the road was Llandrillo. A woman, at 10 minutes past 10 that night, around an hour and 30 minutes after the tremors took place, reported seeing something circular in shape fly over the village. While this anonymous woman did seem to have reported this in the first place, she would later refuse to say anything further, perhaps feeling like she was going to be ridiculed for it. But it wasn't the only thing to be reported from the village. Around that time, Leon Pritchard was now arriving back to the village after finishing a welding course. Leon stated that there were police cars on the road back and 2 army trucks, and they were redirecting drivers. In addition to this, he also said that there was a propeller engine plane flying up and down over the mountains. The plane, and I'd imagine the trucks too, were explained by stating that the RAF, and the military broadly, were conducting training exercises in the region. Locals also stated that shortly after this incident, a military unit rented an outhouse that sat at the foot of the mountain, and they remained there for about 6 to 8 weeks. While interesting, I'm not sure that speaks to much, because it's not actually uncommon for military training to take place in this low population region. This entire ordeal actually reminds me of the Penturk incident, which I covered last year. It's an unusual incident that is very reminiscent of this one in some ways. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to open a new tab. Now, in this particular area, it wouldn't be the first time that an aircraft had come down in the mountains. There have been civilian accidents before and after this incident in question, such as in 1999. The difference being is that in all the other incidents, there was never such speculation that would even come close as to what happened in 1974. In fact, in all of the other instances, they were just clear-cut cases and it was obvious as to what had happened. In January of 1974 though, people all across the region were reporting seeing unusual things happening around the mountain and neighbouring villages. The lights in the sky, the perfect circular reddish-orange glowing light coming from near the summit, which, if Mike is to be believed, either fell or moved to a lower ridge, perhaps explaining why the foot search failed. This particular story didn't end on the same night that it began. Instead, it grew over time as the locals wanted to know what had happened. But all they really got was that it was an earthquake and that there were lampers atop the mountain. Around 3 weeks after that night, on the 15th of February of that year, Geraint Edwards, with a group of his friends from Llandrillo, reported seeing something else above the mountain in roughly the same place. Geraint was a retired gamekeeper and was walking with his friends on their way to play darts. During this walk, he said that they all saw a red oval shape around 600 feet above the mountain. He described it as having a rugger ball shape, but the ends were more pointy. After Geraint's retirement, he took up a hobby of climate research and weather forecasting, and he would maintain weather records for the Meteorological Office, or really the UK's National Weather Service. Geraint did not believe that what he was seeing was just some kind of weird atmospheric effect, and he said that he'd never seen anything like it before. He didn't know how long it had been there, but it moved so fast that he wasn't able to follow it as it disappeared from view. Because of his hobby, he always had a journal on hand, so he was able to document what was happening in quite some detail. Something that I find incredibly interesting about this entire ordeal is that none of the people who saw things happening on the mountain come across as liars. You have the district nurse, Pat Evans, who was so concerned about what she was seeing that she phoned it into the police while near the base of the mountain. There were a number of farmers who were all saying the same thing, and it seems to me that they were only opening themselves up to ridicule by talking about this. In fact, I believe that Pat stopped discussing and refused to talk more about this sometime in the 90s because of that very reason. While it is clear that something certainly happened that night, the real question is, was it something truly unique and out of the ordinary? One of the most commonly accepted explanations for what happened that night was a mixture of two separate and unlikely events happening at the same time at the same place. The loud bang and the tremors heard for miles around the mountain were explained away as a magnitude 3.5 earthquake. I'm not really sure how the earthquake would account for the bang unless it damaged some kind of infrastructure that would cause such a thing, though that was never reported. The Institute of Geological Sciences, now known as the British Geological Survey, states that this quake happened at exactly 8:38 PM on the night in question, and was centred around the fault that runs beneath the mountain. They said that it was registered across North Wales and even reached towns 50 miles away in England. In addition to this, on that night, there were reports from around the country that a bright fireball was seen heading across the sky. This was seen as far away as Cornwall and Northern Ireland. The Coast Guard also reported seeing this. The suggestion was that this meteorite happened to crash into the mountain in Wales right at the same time as an earthquake, which is why even the police felt that it was a plane or something like that. I suppose this meteorite would be an alternative explanation for the bang, as opposed to infrastructure or anything else. However, as far as I can tell, there was never an impact site that was found, so I'm not sure how that would make sense. Although, I suppose you could also argue that suggests that nothing actually hit the mountain at all, whether natural or something more odd. Official reports and now declassified documents by the Ministry of Defence all point to this combination of events. I did come across one fairly strange atmospheric effect that could potentially help explain this too. I had never heard of this before, but there is something known as earthquake lights. This is a luminous optical phenomenon that has appeared in the sky near areas of seismic activity. It seems that there is not a consensus as to why or what is actually happening. It is just something that has been observed all over the world. After doing some research on this, these earthquake lights appear in various forms, but some key characteristics are that they appear as glowing orbs, sometimes flashes of light, aurora-like bands or flickering flames. They have known to be white, blue, and sometimes other colours. They can last from seconds to minutes, and are most often seen near the epicentre. Could that really explain the lights zipping around up there that was reported, and the perfectly spherical orange-red glow? That would also fit the theme of people telling the truth but just not understanding what they were seeing. Going through the accounts, they are all similar and speak to what was happening, so I personally don't believe that anyone was purposefully lying here. It seems to me that people were quite literally just reporting what was going on and what they were seeing. That would make it a case of misidentification, which would obviously be completely understandable if this rare atmospheric event was taking place. I could certainly imagine that causing a lot of confusion, and given just how rare it is, even if that is what happened, it's probably something that would be debated for a long time afterwards. Now, if it was something like that, I'm not sure why that would cause the police, or military I suppose, to cordon off some of the roads and footpaths in the area, even if only briefly. That's if that actually happened and the testimonies of that were truthful. It is important to highlight that Pat herself said that she was not aware of any road closures. So either the closure had to have been incredibly brief, or they didn't happen. However, there is just a lot of testimony that the roads and mountain had been cut off to some degree. One witness, named Jan Roberts, who had lived in close proximity to the mountain for his entire life, recalled that there was a rather large military presence at the time across the valley. Adrian Roberts, unrelated, but he was a farmer and also stated that shortly after the ordeal, people's passage was being blocked by these trucks. Local newspapers also reported seeing military personnel hauling boxes off the mountain, which I'm sure you can imagine the kind of fuel that added to the ongoing speculation. As for Pat, there were those that have argued that when she was at the base of the mountain with her daughters looking up at the summit and watching this spectacle unfold, she might have been witnessing the police search when the 4 members went up. I don't believe she thought this was the case, but the officers and later the RAF personnel would have been equipped with flashlights. There was also the mention of potential poachers being up there. If they'd noticed police officers up there, I could imagine them turning off their lights. Speaking of which, it had been speculated that the poachers may have been using a powerful hunting lamp, which has been argued might have been this circular light that she reported to have seen. I suppose what has been argued, essentially, is that there was a literal perfect storm of confounding factors, so to speak, that made this event look far more unusual than it actually was. I get the sense that many of the locals really felt that that wasn't the case, and that something far more extraordinary had happened. But the official explanation looks to have been there was an earthquake, coupled with a meteorite that was over the same area. There were military drills taking place in the area at the time. The lights atop the mountain were a mixture of police searchers, potential poachers, and maybe even earthquake lights. I suppose it all really comes down to your tolerance of coincidence as to what is acceptable or not. What do you think happened? Was it the perfect storm which caused the mass confusion and misidentification as to what was actually occurring? Or was it something else entirely? Perhaps something a little stranger? With that brings us to the end of this. I'd just like to take the time to thank you for watching, and a big thank you to the patrons who've been running around on the screen. If you found this video interesting, please do remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you didn't like it, then feel free to give me a thumbs down. I'm just looking for your honest opinion either way. I hope that you've had a great day or evening, depending on where you are, and I'll see you in the next one. Be safe guys, peace.